all beginner students of Italian tend to have the same questions. And so here I am trying to answer the 10 most frequently asked questions I get as a teacher of Italian. And hopefully they will be helpful to you. Now, you've been watching our mini-series for beginners, and you have come to basically the end, almost the end, and you have learned a ton, but there are things that keep coming to me as a teacher. And let's see if I can answer one of your questions. And keep in mind that the questions I'm going to answer are generic. The question might look specific, but the idea is that it applies to the whole topic, the whole broader topic. Anyway, let's begin with the first question. Do I say buongiorno or buongiorna if I'm a woman? So this question is generic about gender, and it is confusing, and let's deal with it quickly. You need to understand what needs to change gender. So let's go through the elements of the language. Now we have the vocabulary, the words, the nouns that refer to things, like physical things, chair, house, car, and also abstract things like love and compassion. All those are nouns. They have their own gender, and it will not change based on the user or the person who's been, referring to that thing. So you wouldn't change those words. Now, let's look at buongiorno. That's a specific example, but let's look at buongiorno. Why is buongiorno a word that you wouldn't change? Well, because buongiorno means good day. If you break it down, it's buon means well or good, and then giorno means day. And so it's a phrase that refers to the day, and the word for day is giorno, which happens to be masculine. It will always be masculine, even if you're a woman. But let's keep going with when you should do this. So what other components do we have in a language? Well, we have conjugated verbs. We don't change those for the moment. We don't change those. So then we have those little bits and pieces like prepositions, in, to, at, for. Those ones, they are just a little element of the language. We don't touch those. We have articles. In Italian, you've seen so many. Il, lo, la, gli, un, una. We don't change those. So what is left? Just adjectives. Oh, we'll also have adverbs, things like quickly or a lot. We don't change those either. So really, all you need to change is the adjective. So you got to be aware of what is an adjective. It's a quality, something that describes something. So I'll throw a test at you. So let's think of the word piacere. When you meet somebody, you would say piacere. Does that change? Well, that wouldn't change for two reasons. One is that it's a word that ends in e, and therefore we don't change it because it applies to both genders. But also we don't change it because piacere is a noun that means pleasure. Pleasure to meet you. So you're actually saying a word that is a noun. You're not describing yourself. It's not the same as I am pleased to meet you. In that case, we actually would change it, and I'll give it to you. So the way we say that in Italian is sono lieto di conoscerti. Sono lieto. Lieto is an old-fashioned word for pleased. If I'm a man, I would say lieto because that pleased is about me being pleased to meet you. So it's about me. In that case, as a man, I would say sono lieto. The feminine version would be sono lieta di conoscerti, right? Let's take the word for bravo. When would you say bravo? When somebody has performed something and has done a good job, right? Then you got to be careful. You are referring that adjective, that quality, to a human who could be either gender, right? And so you would have to say bravo if the performer uses the masculine, or brava if you need to use the feminine. And that is the answer to, do I use buongiorno or buongiorna? Buongiorna doesn't exist because we don't change the gender of giorno. When do I use un and when do I use il? Great question. And this one is it's basically about articles. When do I use the definite articles, il, lo, la, those ones, or the indefinite article, un, uno, una, and so on? It's a matter of, I'll give you two steps here. One is, kind of works often the same as English. And so here's an example in Italian. Conosco una persona che parla italiano. Conosco, I know. Una persona is a person che parla, who speaks italiano, Italian, right? So the fact that you know a person in Italian is very similar. It's una persona, it's one person, right? It's just any person, right? It's generic, which is different from Ti presento la persona che parla italiano. Ti presento, I introduce you to, la persona, the person, che parla italiano, who speaks Italian. Now we have a specific person. So overall, it works the same as English. But here's the point, the thing that I may have not told you in the lesson, because it's just an introductory course here, is that Italians tend to use the article, the definite article, a lot more than in English. And so if in doubt, my suggestion would be just use the article. Here are some examples where you always must use the article, the definite article, when with your English brain you wouldn't want to. It's with verbs such as prendere, portare, volere, preferire. So we will say, and piacere. Piacere means to like, it's complicated, but I'll skip that for this lesson. But prendere. We will say prendo la pizza margherita. I'll get the margherita pizza. Not prendo pizza margherita. With prendere, you always have the definite article. Same with volere, wanting. Voglio un caffè, vorrei una pizza. So anything that you want, you need to have an article. It doesn't have to be definite. Now, a strange case is with the verb parlare, and I'm sure you've come across this, and you're wondering, do I say parlo italiano or parlo l'italiano? Well, in that case, you can use either one. We're flexible in that case, so you can use the article or not. Manu, you've said that in the combos CIA and GIA, the I is silent, and it's there to make the ch and the j sound to say things like cha and ja. But I am sure that I've heard words that break that rule, like farmacia, pharmacy, geologia, geology, and so on. What gives? This question is more about flexibility. A language is a living thing, and there will always be things that don't make sense, that don't follow any rule, or that break all the rules. And here's my encouragement to remind you that accept it. Yes, usually we pronounce CIA as cha, but if you come across a word and you are positive that it's chia, then that's how it is. Just say farmacia, because you would be wrong if you said farmacia. So yeah, it's more about understanding that not everything fits in a pattern, and we'll have to learn to make adjustments to what we believe to be true as we observe it with our immersion, meaning we hear it from Italians, real Italians speaking real Italian, then they are probably right, usually. The next one is a good one. Manu, I've tried to speak to Italians, but they don't understand me. What am I doing wrong? First of all, as a beginner, well done to trying to speak to Italians right now, because it's very early. But when it comes to not being understood, I'll tell you what I think is happening, because in most cases, that's really the truth. It's not because of lack of vocabulary. If you don't know a word for something, then you're just not going to say the thing. And so that usually doesn't cause misunderstandings or lack of understanding, because you're just not saying the thing. You're not saying the word because you don't know it. So that's not really an issue. Broken grammar, never a problem. Usually not a problem, because I can talk to you in English with just nouns and you still understand what I'm saying. And I'll give you an example here. Me, hungry. That's very bad English, but you know what I meant to say. And so again, the fact that you don't have accurate grammar yet is not an issue for comprehension from Italian. So what is it? It's pronunciation. It's almost always pronunciation. And again, back to my example. If I said to you, me, hungry, you would understand. But if I said, and it's they would maybe totally out of context, but if I said something like me hungry, because I'm mispronouncing the word for me, because as an Italian I look at it and I think it's me, and for hungry, because as an Italian I would say hungry, then you may not understand, and that's what's happening. And so if Italians don't understand you, it's usually because of the fact that you're not pronouncing clearly enough for them to understand. Bear in mind that as an English speaker, you are used to hearing English with all sorts of accents, because everybody in the world speaks English, or tries to. But Italians are not that used to that, and so you really got to satisfy their wanting to hear some level of good Italian. And so if the good news is that pronunciation is the easiest thing for you to master. It's like the quickest thing that you can dominate, and little plug, but if you're part of our all access platform, one of the many courses that you get is a pronunciation course, which will get you speaking correctly in just a few hours. And so that's not usually a problem once you deal with pronunciation. I love the next one because it happens to me too when I'm learning new languages or when I travel, and I've tried to speak Italian to Italians, but they revert back to English. How can I get them to speak Italian to me? And here's a couple of true facts. One is, we as humans will always prefer to communicate in the easiest language that we have available. And so if I spoke terrible French and that French person spoke terrible Italian, then probably we would have to use English because maybe we speak English better, both of us. And so when it comes to you traveling to Italy, it is really a matter of, is your Italian better or worse than their English? And right now, as a beginner, it's hard to expect that your Italian is better than their English in many cases. But so my advice would be, and it's not totally honest, maybe it's not what other teachers would tell you or what you would want me to say, but don't worry about speaking at the moment. Actually, one of my secret methods of teaching Italian is also to recommend that you do not speak for a little bit. But we're not going to get into that today. But don't worry too much, because as you're developing your Italian with studying, active studying and vocabulary and a lot of immersion, you will come to a point where your Italian is actually quite decent. And even if you haven't had a chance to practice it, you'll manage. But here's my tip is, don't try to speak Italian with Italians when you're really at a basic level, if you notice that they keep switching to English. There could be the suggestion of don't go to touristy places, but if you go to Italy, you're going to go to Rome, you're going to go to Florence and Venice, and so, yeah, it will happen. But what you can do is try to speak Italian in a safe environment. Find friends. Maybe you have friends, you have family that are willing to spend a little bit of time with you. Maybe you can find online partners on platforms like italki. Maybe you're part of our All Access platform where you actually get to speak to my team and they totally understand where you're coming from and the challenges that you have, and they will always help you. And so maybe right now it's not the best expectation for you to go to Italy and right now communicate in Italian. Soon, but not now. Now, the next one is not so much of a question, it's more of a complaint. And it goes something like, Manu, you told us about irregular verbs, but you only conjugated a bunch of them, but you didn't conjugate all the other ones that I actually want, like verbs like volere, potere, dovere, sapere. What about them? Why didn't you give them to us? And this one is an opportunity for me to remind you of a very basic concept of language acquisition, and that is, nobody can teach you a language. You have to learn it yourself. And so that was my way, my subtle way of pointing out the fact that you need to be independent in your studies. Even when you have a really, really good teacher helping you, you need to be independent. And so when you realize that there's a verb that you would like to use, then you're going to look it up. The dictionary, the online dictionary, will tell you whether it's regular or irregular. And if it's irregular, then you'll look at the 6 versions for the 6 possible subjects for the present tense, which is the only tense you know right now. And they'll make sense to you, and then you'll be totally fine. And then when you need another verb, you'll do the same. And you'll keep doing this for every verb and every tense as you learn them. And yeah, so that was a bit intentional, a bit mean of me to not tell you the conjugation. But again, this stuff is available online. You can always find the conjugation of a verb. My job is to help you understand how it works. So hopefully I did that for you. Speaking of verb conjugation, another question is something like, Manu, do I have to conjugate? It's really complicated. And the answer is yes, you do. You can make mistakes, and you can, at times, totally mess it up, and it's fine. It'd be the same if I said something like, when I was young, I play soccer, and I use the present tense instead of the past tense. No big deal, people will understand. So, but do you have to conjugate? Yes, ideally you become really good at not thinking about, well, that's the subject, that's the verb that goes with that subject, just like you do that in English when you attach s or es to your singular verbs in the third person. He goes, he plays. It's just natural to you. It will become natural. So what seems incredibly daunting right now is going to be very easy only a few weeks down the track, maybe a few months. the more Italian you expose yourself to, the more you will realize that they almost never say mangiare. They will say mangio, mangiamo, mangiate, or other tenses. They never say volere, wanting. They would say voglio, or other tenses like vorrei, which is I would like. So yeah, you'll hear it so much that it won't be a problem. So right now, don't be too intimidated by the fact that you do need to conjugate. I love the next question because I will give you the most frustrating answer that a good teacher should give you. And that is, Manu, what does mica mean? Manu, can you explain the meaning of magari? And any of those questions that I've been asked a million times, I keep being asked, and I've made videos about them, but I actually don't want to make those videos because when it comes to the meaning of words, some words, yes, there is a direct equivalent of one object in one language and the other. Right now I'm using this, which is called microfono. And if you ask me, what does microfono mean? I could easily tell you it means microphone. But you could also say mic in English. But you can't say mic in Italian, right? So there are nuances even with the most obvious words. But overall, yes, you could trust the fact that, window is finestra and so on. But that would put you in a very bad position because you don't want to get used to translating things. And even speaking of window, I just said, but in English you have a window of time. Does that work in Italian? I wonder. Well, it doesn't, but sometimes those crazy things also work in Italian, but you can't rely on literal translation. So that is the first problem that I see in that question. Now, when I do make videos on words like mica, magari, and all those ones, I will give you ideas of, in this context, the English equivalent is this. But it's never always accurate. It's never always bulletproof 100%. So what is the best way for you to know the meaning of those difficult words that you come across? It's not really to ask a teacher, not me, not anybody else. It's to pay attention as they occur in real spoken Italian. And how are you going to do that? With immersion. You're spending a ton of time, hopefully, watching content in Italian, created for Italians, and you're just letting it, come into your brain and observe. And as you become more able to understand a little bit more, whether you're doing passive or active immersion, there'll be a point where you say, oh, I heard magari, and I think it means this in this context. And you look it up and say, oh, yeah, it must mean maybe. Okay, and then you go about, believing that magari means maybe. 2 weeks later, you hear it again, and you go, I don't think that means maybe. What could it mean? And well, then you rely on context to realize that it means something else. Maybe you'll get to the idea of what it actually means in that context. Maybe you'll have to look it up. And as you're going through the definition, you will find that there are multiple meanings of magari. And one is hopefully, or I wish that it was so. So while of course I'm always here to help you understand the meaning of an expression, and I will explain to you when this word kind of works the same way as an English word, it's always best if you can figure it out by yourself. Speaking of immersion, something that I hear a lot is, Manu, I've tried doing immersion and it's really hard and it's really frustrating. I can't do it. It just makes me angry and mad and I feel like I'm failing, or whichever way you ask in the question. And I have the answer for you. It's very simple. You are not doing it right. You are trying to understand while the exercise is not about comprehension. So if you try to understand something that it's quite difficult for you at this level, you are going to get frustrated. Just to give you an analogy. Now, I'm Italian and opera is usually in German or Italian. And so I could listen to an opera and try to understand, or I could just listen to the opera and enjoy the fact that it's beautiful, the music is amazing, the singing. I can appreciate the melody. Now, as an Italian, I do not understand the opera. It's old Italian, but also it's sung in a way that it's really, really hard to understand the words. I don't understand most of what they're saying, just like you. And so I could make opera a really horrible experience for me by trying to understand and getting angry that I don't understand, or I could just appreciate the fact that it's beautiful music. That is the purpose of immersion for you, especially as a beginner. It's appreciating the beauty of the language, appreciate the melody, and all those things that we talked about in that dedicated lesson. So, yeah. Now, finally, the question that I know you're wondering, Manu, I've put in so much effort and I enjoyed watching these 30 lessons. I've learned a lot of things. I got used to thinking a bit more how an Italian would think. I'm getting to understand that what I believed was impossible to conquer is actually manageable, and I've learned a bunch of things. I can see that I can already put sentences together, but what next? Now that the 30-day beginner series is over, what am I going to do? And well, worry not, we are here for you. And not only we will continue publishing content here on YouTube, obviously, but in the next video, I will show you what we've put together to help you take your Italian to the next level, all the way to fluency, if that's your thing, or all the way to wherever you want to get to with your Italian. So yes, stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.